The sun hung high and hateful over the Arizona territory, a white-hot coin pressed against the blue throat of the sky. It was the summer of 1886, and the heat did not just sit on the land, it possessed it. It seeped into the cracks of the red earth, curled the edges of the sagebrush, and settled heavy in the lungs of anyone foolish enough to be out at midday. Tleezy Yazi stood in the sliver of shade cast by the overhang of the water station, his back against the rough-hewn timber. He was a stillness in a world that was constantly shifting with wind and dust. To the men who unloaded crates from the freight wagons nearby, he was just another Indian, a Navajo shadow they tried to ignore while gripping their Winchesters a little tighter. They did not know his name meant Little Goat, nor did they know the weight of the silence he carried. He was 23 years old, though the desert had carved lines around his eyes that made him look older. He wore a faded calico shirt, dusty trousers, and moccasins that made no sound when he moved. Around his neck, hidden mostly by the collar of his shirt, but resting cool against his sternum, was a string of turquoise beads. They were imperfect, rough-cut chunks of sky stone that belonged to his grandmother. They were his anchor. They were his oath. He was not here for the shade. His dark eyes, sharp and unblinking, scanned the bust of the chaotic outpost. This was merely a watering stop, a collection of slapdash wooden buildings clinging to the side of the iron rails like barnacles on a ship's hull. But it was a vein through which poison flowed. Whiskey, bad whiskey, laced with kerosene and lye, was moving through these stations, finding its way onto the reservation, turning young men into ghosts and old men into corpses. And with the whiskey came the guns. And with the guns came the excuses the government needed to shrink the Navajo land even further. Tleezy adjusted the brim of his hat. He was looking for a man with a scar running through his eyebrow. A runner for the syndicate. He had tracked the wagon ruts here. 3 days of riding hard, reading the story written in the disturbed gravel and the broken twigs. The wind picked up, tossing a tumbleweed against the legs of a horse tied to the hitching post. The animal spooked, jerking its head. But Tleezy did not flinch. His gaze had snagged on something else, something that did not belong in this brown and gray world. A flash of white. It was a shawl. A woman was stepping off the rear platform of a dusty passenger car that had been decoupled from the morning train due to a mechanical failure. She moved with a hesitation that screamed of fear, yet her chin was held high. Clara Whitmore felt the heat slap her face the moment she stepped out of the carriage. It smelled of sulfur, unwashed bodies, and dry rot. She gripped the handle of her canvas bag until her knuckles turned the color of an old bone. She was 19 years old, and until a week ago, her biggest worry had been whether she had enough ribbon to trim her Sunday bonnet. Now, she was a fugitive, or at least, she felt like one. She pulled the white shawl tighter around her shoulders. Though the air was stifling, the shawl was her mother's. Fine lace that had snagged on a briar bush 3 miles back when she had tried to flee the boarding house. And now it bore a smudge of soot from the train. It felt like a target on her back. Just keep walking. Clara, she told herself. Head down. Find the ticket master. Buy the passage to Santa Fe. Do not look at the men. She had been raised to be a lady. Her father, a stern but loving man who managed the telegraph lines east of Flagstaff, had taught her to pour tea, to stitch a hem, and to read the Bible. He had not taught her how to outrun men who wanted to kill her. He had not taught her what to do when you hold a ledger that proves the most powerful man in the territory is a thief and a murderer. Clara's boots crunched on the gravel. The sound seemed deafening to her ears. She could feel eyes crawling over her. The station was crowded with drifters, prospectors, and railroad workers. Their laughter was loud and jagged. She navigated through the crowd, clutching the bag to her chest. Inside, wrapped in an oilskin cloth, was the ledger. It was heavy, both in weight and in consequence. Her father had died from it. A heart attack, the doctor in town had said, signing the death certificate while Deputy Harlan Voss watched with cold, reptilian eyes. But Clara had seen the bruises. She had found the ledger hidden beneath the floorboards of the telegraph office where her father had left it for her, along with a note written in a trembling hand. Run! Clara! Trust no one. She stumbled slightly as a large man reeking of chewing tobacco and sweat lurched into her path. "Whoa there, little filly," the man slurred, a grin revealing teeth stained yellow. He blocked her way, his bulk casting a shadow over her. "You look lost, and mighty pretty for a place like this." Clara's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She stepped back, her heel catching on a loose stone. "Excuse me, sir, I am just passing through." "Passing through," he laughed, looking back at his companions who were leaning against a stack of crates. "Hear that she's passing through. No lady passes through here alone unless she is looking for company." He reached out a hand, his fingers thick and grime-stained, aiming for her arm. Clara did not scream. She did not faint. A coldness, sharp and metallic like steel, suddenly flooded her veins. It was the same steel that had kept her from weeping when she buried her father. She shifted her weight, preparing to swing the heavy canvas bag at his face if he touched her. She would not be taken. Not today. But before the man's fingers could graze the fabric of her sleeve, a voice cut through the heavy air. It was not loud, but it carried a tone that made the hairs on the back of Clara's neck stand up. "The lady asked to pass." The drunkard blinked, his hand hovering in midair. He turned his head slowly. Tlizi Yazi had stepped out from the shadows of the water tower. He did not have a gun drawn. His hands hung loosely at his sides, near the knife sheathed at his belt. He looked relaxed, almost bored, but there was a tension in his shoulders that suggested a coiled spring. The drunkard sneered, sizing up the Navajo. "This ain't your business, Chief. Go back to selling blankets." Tlizi did not blink. He took one step forward. Just one. The dust swirled around his moccasins. "The train leaves in 1 hour," he said, his English accented but perfectly clear. "You are blocking the way to the ticket booth." The drunkard looked at Tlizi, then at the knife, then back at Tlizi's eyes. There was something in those dark depths that promised violence, not the messy, loud violence of a bar brawl, but the swift, silent violence of the desert. The drunkard grunted, spat a stream of brown tobacco juice onto the ground near Tlizi's feet, and stepped aside. "Ain't worth the trouble," the man muttered, shoving past Clara. Clara let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. Her knees felt like water. She looked up at the stranger who had intervened. He was tall, with hair blacker than a raven's wing tied back from a face that seemed carved from granite. His cheekbones were high and sharp, his skin the color of the earth around them. But it was his eyes that caught her. They were not cruel. They were guarded, yes, wary as a wolf's, but there was no malice in them. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling despite her best efforts. Tlizi looked at her. He took in the white shawl, the dust clinging to the hem of her blue dress, the way her hands clutched that bag as if it contained the crown jewels. He saw the fear in her gray eyes, vast and stormy, but he also saw that she had been ready to swing that bag. She was terrified, but she was not broken. "This is a bad place to be alone," he said. His voice was low, a rumble in his chest. "I have no choice," Clara replied, straightening her spine. She felt a strange need to explain herself to this quiet man, which was dangerous. "Trust no one." He nodded once, a sharp dip of his chin. "Then keep your eyes open. The wolves here walk on 2 legs. He turned to leave, dismissing her as easily as he had dismissed the drunkard. He had intervened because it was the right thing to do, not because he wanted a conversation. He had a mission. He had to find the runner. "Wait," Clara called out. He stopped but did not turn back completely, just angled his head. She hesitated. What was she doing? She did not know him, but the isolation was eating her alive. "Do you know if the eastbound train is running on time?" Tlizi looked over his shoulder. The sunlight caught the turquoise beads at his throat. "The trains run when the money says they run, but the tracks are clear." He walked away then, disappearing around the corner of the depot with a silent grace that made him seem like a spirit. Clara watched him go, for the first time in 3 days, since she had pried up the floorboards and found her father's legacy of danger. She felt a tiny flicker of safety. It was fleeting, gone as quickly as it came. But it was there. He had called her a lady. He had not looked at her with hunger or greed. He had simply cleared the path. She adjusted her shawl, the white fabric stark against the grime of the station. She turned and walked toward the ticket booth. She had a ticket to buy. She had a ledger to protect. And somewhere in the back of her mind, she wondered about the man with the turquoise beads and the eyes that saw everything. Lizzie moved through the alleyways behind the main street. The encounter with the white woman sat uneasily in his mind. She was too clean, too soft for this hard land. Yet there was a fire in her. He had seen the way her knuckles whitened. Most women from the East would have fainted or screamed. She had prepared to fight. He respected that, but he could not afford distractions. He reached the back of the livery stable, the smell of hay and manure thick in the air. He found a spot where the wood was warped and peered through a gap in the siding. Inside, 3 men were talking low. One of them he recognized a man named Skinner, known for running guns to the Apaches and whiskey to the Navajo, stirring up wars where there were none so he could profit from the chaos. "Boss says the shipment is delayed," Skinner was saying, sharpening a knife on a whetstone. The sound was a rhythmic shh. "Crow is nervous, says there is a leak." "Crow is always nervous," another man scoffed. "He owns half the territory. Who's going to touch him?" "Some girl," Skinner said. Lizzie froze. "Whitmore's daughter. They say the old man kept records. If that girl gets those papers to the marshal in Santa Fe, or worse, to the press in the East, Crow's land deals go up in smoke." Lizzie pulled back from the wall. The pieces clicked together in his mind like the mechanism of a Winchester rifle. The girl at the station, the bag she clutched so tightly. Whitmore. He knew the name. The man who ran the telegraphs. A man who had been kind to the Navajo when others were not. So, the girl was not just a lost traveler. She was the leak, and she was walking straight into a trap. He looked down at his hands. They were calloused, stained with the red dust of his home. He had sworn to his mother, on her deathbed, that he would protect his sisters, his people. He had sworn to stop the poison that was killing them. If this girl had proof that Silas Crow was behind the whiskey running, then she was the key. Crow was the head of the snake. Cut off the head, and the body dies. The whiskey stops. The land grabs stop. But involving himself with a white woman, a fugitive white woman, was a death sentence. If he was caught helping her, they would hang him without a trial. He touched the turquoise beads again. "Breathe," he told himself. Think. He could walk away. He could find another way to get to Crow. He could let the wolves have the girl. He closed his eyes and saw her face again. The gray eyes, the white shawl, the way she stood her ground against a giant. "The wolves here walk on 2 legs. He cursed softly in his native tongue, a sharp sound that was lost in the wind. He turned away from the livery stable. He was not going to the ticket booth. He was going to check his horse, check his rifle, and wait. Because if Skinner knew about the girl, then the hunters were already closing in. Clara sat on a wooden bench inside the station house, the air stagnant and buzzing with flies. She had purchased her ticket. It had cost her $12, a significant portion of the money she had found in her father's tin box. The ticket master had looked at her suspiciously, a man with spectacles and a nose red from drink. But he had taken the money. She checked the clock on the wall. It was a grand thing. Oak and brass, ticking away the seconds of her life. 1 hour had turned into 30 minutes. The train was being coupled. She could hear the heavy clanging of iron outside. She opened her bag just a crack, peering inside to reassure herself. The ledger was there. Next to it was a small daguerreotype of her parents, taken when she was a baby. Her mother looked so serene, her father so proud. They are gone now. Both of them. She was the last Whitmore. "You miss them?" Clara jumped, snapping the bag shut. She looked up. An old woman was sitting on the bench opposite her. She was Mexican, her face a road map of wrinkles, wearing a black mantilla. Clara stammered. "Yes, I do. Loss is a heavy stone to carry." the woman said, her voice raspy. She pointed a gnarled finger at Clara's bag. But fear is heavier. You carry a lot of fear, child. I'm fine, Clara lied, forcing a smile that felt brittle. Be careful, the woman whispered, leaning forward. I see men outside. They ask questions. About a girl in a blue dress. About a white shawl. Clara's blood ran cold. The ice returned to her veins. Sharper this time. They were here. Crow's men. They had tracked her faster than she had anticipated. She had thought she lost them at the river crossing 2 days ago. Thank you, Clara said, standing up abruptly. She could not stay in the station house. It was a cage. She walked to the door and peered out through the dusty glass. 3 men were standing by the platform. They wore long dusters. Despite the heat, one of them had a silver badge pinned to his chest, but it was tarnished. Deputies, hired guns with a sliver of authority. She recognized the one in the middle. He had been at her father's funeral, standing in the back, smoking a cigar while the priest spoke of eternal peace. She was trapped. If she went out to the train, they would see her. If she stayed here, they would come in. She looked around frantically. There was a back door, leading to the loading dock. It was risky. It led out to the open yards where the freight was stored. She had no choice. Clara pushed through the back door, stepping out into the blinding sunlight. The heat hit her again, but she ignored it. She moved behind a stack of barrels, her breathing shallow and fast. The freight train was there, steam hissing from the engine. It was a different train than the passenger one, heading west. Not east, but it was moving, or about to move. She saw the men from the platform walking toward the station house. They were checking the perimeter. Clara made a decision. East, west, it did not matter. Only a way mattered. She gathered her skirts in one hand, clutching the bag with the other, and ran. She ran toward the rear of the freight train, toward the last car, which was an open boxcar half filled with hay. She reached the car, throwing her bag in first. She scrambled up, the wood rough against her palms, splintering into her skin. She hauled herself over the edge just as she heard the heavy door of the station house slam open. She went out the back, a voice shouted. Clara rolled into the hay, her heart pounding so hard she thought it would burst. She pulled the white shawl off her shoulders. It was too bright, too visible, and stuffed it into her bag. She crawled into the darkest corner of the boxcar, behind a crate marked machinery. She lay there, listening. Footsteps crunched on the gravel outside. Check the yards, a voice commanded. The train whistle blew, a long, mournful shriek that vibrated in her bones. The couplings clanked, a domino effect of metal slamming metal. The car jerked forward. Clara squeezed her eyes shut. Please, please move! The train groaned and began to roll. Slow at first, then picking up a rhythm. Chug, chug, chug. She was safe. For the moment. She exhaled. A long, trembling sound. She opened her eyes and looked across the boxcar. In the opposite corner, sitting in the shadows with his legs stretched out and his hat pulled low, was the Navajo. Tul-Easy Yaji pushed the brim of his hat up with one finger. He did not look surprised. He looked resigned. I told you, he said, his voice barely audible over the noise of the wheels on the track. The wolves walk on 2 legs. Clara stared at him. She should have been terrified. She was trapped in a moving boxcar with a strange man, a warrior who carried a knife and moved like a ghost. But as she looked at him, seeing the way his hand rested calmly on his knee, seeing the steady rhythm of his breathing, she did not feel fear. She felt a strange, inexplicable sense of destiny. Are you following me? She asked, her voice gaining a little strength. I am following the whiskey, he replied simply. And it seems the whiskey and you are traveling on the same road. The train picked up speed, leaving the town of Dry Creek behind, heading into the vast, red emptiness of the desert. The wind rushed through the open door, whipping Clara's hair across her face. I have money, she said, instinctively reaching for her bag. I can pay you to... Put your money away, Tul-Easy said, his tone cutting her off. He looked out at the passing landscape, his profile sharp against the bright light of the doorway. Money is what started this war. It will not finish. He turned to look at her then. Really look at her. You are running from Silas Crow. It was not a question. Clara nodded slowly. Yes. He is a man who eats land and people. Too easy, said. He touched the beads at his neck. If you run from him, you must run fast, and you must never stop. I have something that can stop him, Clara said, patting the canvas bag. Evidence. Tell Easy's eyes narrowed slightly. He remained silent for a long time, the rhythm of the train filling the space between them. Finally, he spoke. Then you are more dangerous than the whiskey, he said. He shifted, making himself more comfortable in the hay. He did not move closer to her, maintaining a respectful distance. Yet his presence filled the car. Rest, he commanded softly. The road is long, and tonight the moon will be full. We will be easy to see. Clara leaned back against the wooden slats of the car. She was exhausted. Her body ached, her mind spun. But she was alive. She looked at the warrior across from her. He had closed his eyes, appearing to sleep. But she knew he was listening to everything: the wind, the wheels, the beat of her own heart. Outside, the desert stretched out, vast and indifferent. The red dust rose up to meet the train, coating everything in a fine, bloody mist. Clara Whitmore closed her eyes. She was running into the unknown, with a savage land outside and a silent warrior inside. But as the train carried them further into the heat, she realized she was no longer just a victim. She was a player in the game now, and she was not alone. The train rattled on. A metal snake cutting through the garden of stone, carrying the girl with the iron will, and the boy with the turquoise path toward a horizon that promised both fire and blood. This was only the beginning. The rhythm of the train wheels against the iron tracks was a hypnotic, grinding lullaby. But there was no sleep in the eyes of Tlizzy Yazzie. He sat cross-legged on the floor of the boxcar, his posture rigid, like a mountain lion waiting for the wind to change. Across from him, Clara Whitmore huddled in the straw, clutching her canvas bag to her chest as if it contained the beating heart of the world. The heat inside the wooden car was stifling, a thick, dusty blanket that made the air shimmer. Hours had passed since they left the station, and the sun was beginning its slow descent, painting the interior of the car in long, jagged shadows. "Why do you watch the door?" Clara asked. Her voice was small, barely audible over the clatter of the train. Tlizzy did not look at her immediately. His gaze remained fixed on the sliver of landscape rushing by outside the open sliding door sagebrush, red rock, and the endless, unforgiving sky. "Because the door is where the trouble comes in," he said, his voice flat. He turned his head slowly, his dark eyes landing on the bag in her lap. "And because you are carrying trouble." Clara stiffened. "I told you, it is evidence." "Evidence of what?" "Of everything," Clara said, her voice gaining a sudden, sharp edge. She loosened her grip on the bag and reached inside, pulling out the heavy, leather-bound ledger. She did not open it, but her hand rested on the cover possessively. "Silas Crow isn't just stealing land. He is moving weapons, rifles, crates of them." Twilly went very still. The name Crow was a curse among his people, but weapons were a different kind of threat. "Whiskey kills us slowly," he said. "Guns kill us fast." "How do you know this?" "My father," Clara whispered. "He was the telegraph operator at the junction. He heard the messages coming through the wire. Coded messages. He wrote them down. He deciphered them." She tapped the book. "It is all here. Dates, shipment numbers, the names of the men he paid to raid the settlements and make it look like—" She hesitated, looking at Tlizzy. "Like it was us." Tlizzy finished for her. His expression did not change, but the air around him seemed to grow colder. "He arms the outlaws to attack the ranchers, and then blames the Navajo to get the cavalry to clear the land." "Yes," Clara said. "And if I can get this to the federal marshal in Santa Fe, Crow hangs." Tlizzy looked at the girl. She was small, pale, and trembling, but her eyes were clear. She was not running away from a sin. She was running toward a reckoning. He realized then that he could not simply leave her at the next stop. The book she carried was the shield his people needed. Suddenly, the rhythm of the train changed. The steady clack-clack slowed, replaced by the high-pitched squeal of metal grinding on metal. The car lurched forward, throwing Clara off balance. "We are slowing down," she gasped, scrambling back into a sitting position. "Why are we slowing down? We are nowhere near a town." Lizzie stood up, moving with the fluid grace of a cat. He moved to the edge of the open door and peered out, keeping his body hidden in the shadows. "Water station," he said. "The engine needs to drink." He scanned the wooden platform approaching on the right. It was a desolate stop, a water tower, a pile of coal, and a small shack. But there were horses tied to the rail. 3 of them. Their flanks were heaving, covered in sweat and foam. They had been ridden hard. Lizzie stepped back from the light. "Hide!" he commanded. "What?" "Hide!" The train groaned to a halt with a final, jarring shudder. Dust billowed up from the tracks, choking the air. Before Clara could ask another question, heavy boots crunched on the gravel outside. "Check the cars," a voice shouted. It was a rough, gravelly voice, accustomed to shouting over wind and cattle. "Every single one. The telegraph said she might have hopped the freight." Clara's face was drained of blood. She looked around the empty boxcar. There was nowhere to go. The crates were too small to hide behind. The straw was too thin. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her chest. She scrambled backward, crab-walking until she hit the solid wall of the car, but she felt exposed. She looked at Lizzie. He was standing near the crates, a large, solid presence in the dim light. He was her only cover. She lunged toward him, abandoning all propriety. She pressed herself into the space between the crates and his tall frame, using his body to shield hers from the open door. Her fingers dug into the fabric of his shirt. "Please," she whispered, her breath hitching in her throat. "Let me hide close to you." Lizzie looked down. He could smell the fear on her, sharp and acrid, mixed with the scent of lavender soap that still clung to her skin. He did not push her away. He shifted his stance, widening his shoulders, effectively blocking her from view. "Silence," he breathed. A shadow fell across the open door of the boxcar. "You there, Injun?" A man hauled himself up into the doorway. He was big, wearing a long duster coat covered in road dust. On his arm, a strip of red cloth was tied the mark of Silas Crow's enforcers. The smell of cheap whiskey wafted into the car, pungent and sweet, masking the smell of the desert. 2 other men appeared behind him on the ground, their hands hovering near the revolvers at their hips. "We are looking for a girl," the man in the car said, his eyes adjusting to the gloom. He spat on the floorboards, missing Easy's moccasins by an inch. Brown hair, scrawny, carrying a canvas bag. A thief. "Have you seen her?" Easy did not flinch. He did not look down at Clara, who was curled into a ball behind his legs, her face pressed against his calf. He looked the man in the eye. "I see only dust," Lizzie said. His voice was calm, devoid of fear. The bounty hunter narrowed his eyes. He took a step forward, his spurs jingling. "Don't play games with me, savage. We know she is on this train. If you are hiding her—" He stopped. His gaze had drifted past Easy, toward the corner where the straw was disturbed. He saw the edge of a white piece of fabric, Clara's shawl, which had slipped from her bag in her haste. The hunter grinned, a slow, predatory baring of teeth. "Well, now, that is a mighty fine piece of lace for a buck like you to be carrying." He reached for his gun. Easy moved. He did not draw a weapon. He kicked the crate next to him, a heavy wooden box filled with mining tools. It slid across the floor with a violent scrape, slamming into the hunter's shins. The man howled, stumbling backward. "Get him!" he screamed. "Run!" Easy shouted. He grabbed Clara by the arm, hauling her to her feet with a strength that shocked her. He did not wait for her to gather her wits. He dragged her toward the opposite door of the boxcar, the one facing away from the platform, toward the open desert. "Jump! It is too high!" Clara cried, looking down at the jagged rocks below. "Jump or die!" The sound of a gunshot cracked through the air, deafening in the enclosed space. A bullet splintered the wood frame of the door mere inches from Clara's head. She screamed, but she jumped. They hit the ground hard. The earth was unforgiving, a mix of gravel and dry scrub. Clara rolled, the breath knocked out of her skirts tangling around her legs. Pain flared in her palms and knees as the rocks bit into her skin. "Up!" Tulisi was already on his feet. He pulled her up, not gently. "Move! Into the rocks!" Behind them, chaos erupted. The train whistle blew an alarm. More shots were fired wild, angry shots into the air. "There by the ridge," someone shouted. Tulisi did not look back. He kept a grip on Clara's arm, guiding her, half carrying her as they scrambled up a steep embankment. The terrain was treacherous, a maze of sandstone boulders and prickly pear cactus. Clara's lungs burned. Her boots slipped on the loose shale. Every breath tasted of dust. I can't." "You can," Tulisi growled. "You have the book. You have to—" They crested the ridge and dropped down into a narrow fissure on the other side, a natural cut in the earth carved by ancient rains. The walls of the canyon rose up around them, blocking the sun and, more importantly, blocking them from the view of the men at the train. They ran until the sounds of the shouting faded into the distance, replaced by the heavy silence of the desert. Tulisi stopped finally in the shadow of a large overhang. He released Clara's arm. She collapsed against the rock wall, sliding down until she was sitting in the dirt, gasping for air. Her chest heaved. Her hair had come loose from its pins, falling in a tangled curtain around her face. Tulisi stood over her, listening. He checked the wind. He checked the skyline. Nothing. They had lost them. For now. He looked down at the girl. She was a mess. Her blue dress was torn at the hem. Her hands were scraped and bleeding slightly. Dirt smeared her cheek. But she was clutching the bag. She had not let go of the bag. He felt a grudging respect stir in his chest. She was soft. Yes, she was not made for this land, but she had jumped. "Are you hit?" he asked. Clara shook her head, unable to speak yet. She held up her hands, examining the raw skin on her palms. "Just scraped." Tulisi crouched down. He reached out and took her wrist, turning it over to inspect the injury. His hands were large and rough, but his touch was surprisingly light. "Dirt in the wound," he muttered. "We will clean it later. We need to keep moving before they find the tracks." Clara looked at him. Up close, his face was a mask of concentration. "You saved me," she said, her voice trembling. "Why, you could have let them take me. You could have walked away." Tulisi met her gaze. "That book," he said, pointing to the bag. "If it speaks the truth, then it is not just your life in that bag. It is the life of my family, my people." He paused, his eyes softening just a fraction. "And 3 men against 1 woman is not a fight. It is a slaughter. I do not stand by for slaughter." Clara swallowed hard. The isolation she had felt for days, the crushing weight of being the pariah, the runaway. The thief lifted slightly. She was being hunted by society, rejected by her own town. But here, in the dust and the heat, this stranger had stood between her and the bullet. She shifted, and her shawl, which she had stuffed hastily into the top of her bag, spilled out. It was dirty now, stained with the red earth of the fall. The ribbon that tied it at the front had snapped in the struggle. She picked it up, her fingers fumbling with the broken ends. "It is ruined," she murmured. "My mother's shawl." Tulisi watched her. He saw the way her lip quivered, not from the danger, but from the loss of this small, beautiful thing. Without a word, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small strip of leather he used for binding herbs. He took the shawl from her hands. Clara went still. She watched as his dark fingers worked with the delicate white lace. He did not try to fix the ribbon. Instead, he threaded the leather strip through the eyelets of the lace, creating a new fastening. It was a crude repair rough leather against fine cotton, but it was strong. He moved closer to her to hand it back. The distance between them closed. She could smell sage and wood smoke on his skin. He did not just hand it to her. He placed it around her shoulders. His hands lingered for a second, tying the leather strip in a secure knot at her throat. It was an intimate gesture. A husband might do this for a wife, a father for a child. Talizi's knuckles brushed against her collarbone. He froze for a heartbeat, and Clara's breath caught in her throat. "It is not ruined," he said quietly, his voice low and vibrating in the small stone canyon. "It is mended. It is different now. Like you." He pulled his hands away and stood up, the moment breaking like a fever. "We walk now," he said, turning his back to her to scan the horizon. "The sun will go down in 2 hours. We need to cover 5 miles before the moon rises." Clara touched the leather knot at her throat. It felt warm. "Thank you," she whispered. She grabbed her bag and stood up. Her legs were shaky, and her knees burned. But she followed him. She followed the silent warrior into the vast, red labyrinth of the Arizona desert. She was a fugitive. She was an outcast. But as she watched his broad back moving ahead of her, she knew one thing for certain. She was no longer alone. The sun dipped lower, casting long purple shadows across the canyon floor. The heat began to bleed out of the air, replaced by a creeping chill. Talizi set a punishing pace, but he paused every so often to let Clara catch her breath. They walked in silence, but it was a companionable silence. Clara watched him. She watched how he moved, how he scanned the ground. He was reading a story she could not see: a bent twig, a disturbed patch of sand, the flight of a hawk. "What is your name?" she asked after a mile. "You never told me." He did not stop walking. "Talizi Yazi. Talizi Yazi." She tried to repeat it, stumbling over the glottal stops and the tone. He stopped then and turned to her. A faint ghost of a smile touched the corner of his mouth. "Close enough. It means little goat." "Little goat," Clara blinked. "But you are not little." "I was once," he said. "Names are wishes. Sometimes my mother wished for me to be stubborn and able to climb anything, like a goat." "And were you stubborn?" "I am still here," he said simply. "So I must be?" He looked at her. "And you? You are Clara." "Clara Whitmore." "Clara." He tested the name. "It sounds like clear water, yet you carry a storm in that bag." Clara smiled. It was the first genuine smile she had felt in a long time. It cracked the dried mud on her face. "Maybe I am stubborn too." "Good," Talizi said, turning back to the path. "You will need to be— the wolves are behind us. Clara Whitmore. And the night is long." They continued on. The first stars began to prick the darkening sky. Far behind them, the faint echo of a train whistle drifted on the wind, a lonely, mournful sound. But ahead, the desert opened up, wild and indifferent and free. Talizi walked with his hand resting near his knife. Clara walked with her hand clutching the ledger. The leather tie on her shawl held fast against the wind. It was a small thing, a knot of deer hide, but in the fading light, it felt like a promise that he would lead, and she would follow, until the truth was safe or until the desert claimed them both. The land did not welcome them. It merely tolerated their passage. They moved through a dry wash, a scar in the earth where water had once rushed, but now only memory and dust remained. The walls of the arroyo rose high on either side, shielding them from the flat horizon but trapping the heat. It was a furnace of red stone and silence. Talizi Yazi walked ahead, his pace relentless. He did not march, he flowed. He stepped on flat stones and patches of hard-packed clay, leaving no imprint for the wolves who followed. Clara Whitmore stumbled behind him. Her boots, purchased for church on Sundays and walks to the telegraph office, were thin-soled and ill-suited for the jagged geography of the territory. Every step sent a jolt of pain up her shins, settling as a dull ache in the small of her back. She watched the back of the Navajo warrior. He had not spoken in 2 hours. He was a creature of this harsh world, made of the same copper earth and ironwood. Clara felt like an intruder. a soft, pale thing that would wither and blow away with the next gust of wind. Fear was a cold stone in her stomach, heavier than the hunger that gnawed at her. It was not just the fear of the heat or the thirst. It was the fear of the man walking in front of her. Not him specifically, he had saved her. He had tied her shawl with a gentleness that confused her, but what he represented. Men. Men with strength. Men who could snap a wrist or end a life with a casual flick of a hand. Since her father died, she had learned that a woman without a protector was not a person in the eyes of the law or the town. She was property, a parcel of land to be claimed, a ledger to be stolen, a body to be used. She gripped the strap of her canvas bag until her fingers cramped. She would not be sold. She would not be taken. "Step where I step," Tulalizi said, his voice startling her in the quiet. He did not turn around. "You drag your feet. You leave trails a blind man could follow." "I am trying," Clara snapped, the heat fraying her temper. "I am not a goat." Tulalizi stopped. He turned slowly, his face impassive. He looked at her dusty hem, her flushed face, the sweat plastering her hair to her forehead. "No, you are not. A goat would know not to step on the rattleweed." He pointed to a cluster of dry, innocent-looking brush near her right boot. Clara jumped back, nearly twisting her ankle. Is there a snake?" "No snake," Tulalizi said. And for a second, she thought she saw a flicker of amusement in his dark eyes. "But the pods rattle when you brush them. Sound travels far in the canyon. Silence is your shield." "Clara." He used her name. It sounded strange on his tongue, stripped of its softness, turned into something solid. "Come," he said. "There will be water soon." They climbed out of the wash an hour later, the sun beginning to bleed orange across the western sky. Tulalizi led her toward a cluster of boulders that looked no different from 1,000 others. But as they rounded the bend, Clara saw a small structure tucked against the rock face. It was a hogan, built of logs and packed earth, blending perfectly into the landscape. An old woman sat outside, grinding corn in a stone metate. She was tiny, her skin like crumpled parchment, her silver hair tied back with a woven string. She did not look up as they approached, the rhythmic shh of the grinding stone never faltering. Te-Easy stopped a few yards away and spoke in his own tongue. The language was fluid, full of breath and clicks, sounding like the wind in the sagebrush. The old woman stopped grinding. She looked up, her eyes milky with age but sharp with intelligence. She answered him, her voice cracking like dry wood. "This is Grandmother Maya," Tulalizi said to Clara. "She says you look like a ghost who has been dragged through a cactus patch." Clara managed a weak smile. "She is not wrong." Maya beckoned them closer. She did not fuss or coo. She pointed to a clay jar in the shade. "Water," she said in English, the word heavy and thick. "Drink slowly, or belly sick." Clara drank. The water was cool and tasted of earth and minerals, but it was the sweetest thing she had ever tasted. She handed the ladle to Tulalizi, their fingers brushing. He drank, his eyes scanning the horizon even as he swallowed. Maya motioned for Clara to sit. The old woman took a salve from a small pot. It smelled of pine resin and bear grease and began to apply it to the scrapes on Clara's arms and the raw blisters on her heels. Her hands were rough, but her touch was clinical and efficient. "You run," Maya stated, not asking. She looked at the bag Clara kept on her lap. "Heavy burden?" "It is the truth," Clara said defensively. "I carry the truth about bad men." Maya laughed, a wheezing, dry sound. "Truth," she muttered. "White man truth is on paper. Navajo truth is in blood." She looked Clara in the eye. "Truth is not for shouting. Child, it is for surviving. You keep it quiet. You live. You shout it. You die." Tulalizi sat on a flat rock nearby, cleaning his rifle. "She carries the book of Silas Crow," he told the old woman. "It shows how he buys the whiskey and the guns." Maya spat on the ground at the mention of the name. "Crow." "He is sick." Tulalizi looked at Clara. "You asked why I helped you. Maya lost 2 sons to the whiskey Crow brings. They traded their sheep, then their wool, then their mines. One froze to death in a ditch. The other was shot by a rancher for stealing a saddle to buy more drinks. Clara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the setting sun. She had known Crow was a criminal, a manipulator of land deeds and railroad contracts. She had not thought of the human cost, the slow poison he poured into the veins of the territory. "He creates the problem," Lizzie said, his voice hard. "He gives the whiskey to the young men who have lost their way. They get drunk, they get angry, they steal. Then Crow goes to the government and says, 'Look, the savages are dangerous. We need more soldiers. We need more land.' And the government gives it to him. He snapped the breech of his rifle shut. Your book proves he buys the poison. It proves he created the monster he claims to fight." I did not know about your sons," Clara whispered to Maya. "I am sorry." Maya patted Clara's hand. "Do not be sorry. Be fast." The moment was shattered by Easy standing up abruptly. He tilted his head, listening. The wind shifted, carrying faint sounds from the valley floor below. "Horses," he said. "Shod hooves. 3. No, 4 riders." Clara scrambled up, forgetting her sore feet. "Is it them?" Deputy Voss, Easy said grimly. "I know the gait of his horse. He rides a roan that favors its left foreleg." "He found us," Clara gasped. "How did he find us?" "He has a tracker," Easy said. "A Pima scout, perhaps, or he just knows the water holes." He looked at Maya. "We must go. We cannot bring trouble to your door." Maya waved a dismissive hand. "Go." "I am an old bone. Voss has no use for old bones." She shoved a handful of dried meat and cornbread into Clara's hands. "Eat while you walk." Easy grabbed Clara's arm. "We need to break the trail. Come." They left the hogan, running now, not walking. Easy led her away from the protective cover of the rocks and out toward a patch of dry, brittle scrub oak. "What are you doing?" Clara hissed, as he stopped and struck a lucifer match against his thumb. "They will see the fire." "That is the point," Lizzie said. He dropped the match into a tumbleweed lodged at the base of a dead bush. The dry wood caught instantly, a crackle of orange flame leaping up. He grabbed a handful of sage and threw it on the fire. Thick, white smoke began to billow, rising straight up into the still air. "They will see the smoke," Lizzie explained, grabbing her hand again. "They will think we are camping, careless and stupid. They will ride toward it, but we will not be here." He pulled her back toward the rocks. But this time they climbed up, hand over hand, scaling a steep fissure that led to a higher ridge. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. Below them, the fire grew. Not a wildfire, but a beacon. From their high vantage point, hidden behind a slab of sandstone, they watched. 10 minutes later, 4 riders galloped into view below. Easy had been right. It was Deputy Harlan Voss leading them. He was a large man with a thick mustache and a star that gleamed in the twilight. He rode with brutal efficiency, spurring his horse toward the smoke. "Spread out," Voss's voice drifted up to them, thin and tinny. "They are right there. I want the girl alive, the Indian you can drag." Clara shuddered. Voss was not a lawman. He was a butcher with a badge. They watched as the posse circled the fire, finding nothing but burning bush and empty sand. Voss cursed, his horse stamping in frustration. He shouted at his tracker, pointing west. "They think we kept moving west," Lizzie whispered near her ear. "The smoke draws the eye, making them miss the faint tracks leading up. You tricked them," Clara breathed. "I bought us time." Lizzie corrected. "Time is short. Come. We must hide until they move on." He led her into a deep cleft in the rock, a narrow cave barely wide enough for 2 people. It was dark and cool inside, smelling of dust and ancient stone. They squeezed in, sitting shoulder to shoulder, knees touching. Outside, the voices of the men faded as they rode west, chasing a ghost. In the silence of the cave, the adrenaline began to fade, leaving Clara trembling. She broke a piece of the cornbread Maya had given her and offered half to Lizzie. He took it, his fingers brushing hers again. In the small space, his presence was overwhelming. He was solid, warm, and terrifyingly capable. They ate in silence for a moment, the sound of chewing loud in the enclosed space. "You eat like a squirrel," Tolidzi said suddenly. Clara paused, a crumb on her lip. "I beg your pardon?" "Fast," he said, and she could hear the smile in his voice even in the dark. "Like you think someone is going to take the nut away." Clara let out a short, startled laugh. It was a rusty sound, but it felt good. "I suppose I am a squirrel, running from the wolves." "Squirrels are fast," Tolidzi said, "and they survive winter when the wolves starve. Is that Navajo wisdom?" "No, that is just an observation." Clara leaned her head back against the stone wall. The fear was still there, but the panic had receded. "He is not just a thief, you know," she said quietly. "Silas Crow," Tolidzi chewed slowly. "A thief is enough to hang a man. He wants to marry me," Clara said. The words tasted like bile. Tolidzi stopped chewing. The air in the cave seemed to tighten. "Marry you. After my father died, Crow came to the house," Clara whispered, staring into the dark. "He was wearing a fine suit. He brought flowers. He said a woman alone needs protection. He said he would take care of the telegraph station, and the land, and me." She hugged her knees to her chest. "He had the papers with him, a marriage license, and a deed transfer. He said if I signed the license, the questions about the ledger would disappear. He said if I became Mrs. Crow, a wife cannot testify against her husband." Tolidzi remained silent, but Clara could feel the tension radiating off him. His arm, pressed against hers, was hard as stone. "He tried to take my hand," Clara continued, her voice trembling. "His hands were soft, like wet dough, but his grip, it was like a trap. He told me I was pretty. He said he would break me in like a wild filly." A low sound rumbled in Tolidzi's chest. It was not a word. It was a growl, a deep, primal sound of disgust and anger. "He will not touch you," Tolidzi said. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of a mountain. "He owns the town, Tolidzi," Clara said. "He owns the judge. He owns Deputy Voss." "He does not own the desert," Tolidzi replied. He turned his head, and in the sliver of moonlight filtering into the cave, Clara saw his eyes. They were fierce. "And he does not own you. You are not a horse to be broken. You are the woman who jumped from a train." Clara looked at him, breathless. No one had ever spoken to her like that. Her father had loved her, but he had treated her like a fragile doll. Crow treated her like a prize. Tolidzi treated her like an equal, a fellow survivor. "Tell me," she whispered. "Tell me we can make it." "We will make it," Tolidzi said. "We rest now. 2 hours. Then we move." Clara closed her eyes, exhausted. She leaned slightly, her shoulder resting against his arm. He did not pull away. In the dark, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing, she felt safe. For the first time since her father's heart stopped, she felt safe. They moved out before dawn, under the cover of the false morning light. Tolidzi led them up, out of the canyon and onto a high plateau. The air was thin and cold. As the sun crested the horizon, painting the world in violent shades of gold and violet, Tolidzi stopped. He raised a hand, pointing north. "Look," he said. Clara squinted against the light. In the distance, miles away across the scrubland, a column of smoke rose into the sky. It was too thick to be a campfire. It was dark, oily smoke. "What is that?" "The Double C Ranch," Tolidzi said. "Silas Crow's fortress." "It looks like a factory," Clara said. "It is where the cattle are," Tolidzi said. "And the wagon, and the whiskey." He turned to her. "The ledger must go to the marshal in Santa Fe, but to get to the main road, to get to the pass that leads out of this valley, we have to go past that ranch." Clara stared at the distant smoke. It looked like the mouth of hell. "We have to go closer," she asked, her voice small. "We have to thread the needle," Tolidzi said. "Voss is behind us, searching the west canyons. Crow is ahead of us. We walk the line between them." He checked his rifle again. "Are you ready?" "Clara Whitmore." Clara touched the leather knot at her throat. the one Talisi had tied. She thought of Crow's soft, wet hands. She thought of Maya's dead sons. She thought of the ledger in her bag. She squared her shoulders. "I am ready." Talisi nodded. It was a sharp, approving motion. "Good, because the easy part is over." They began the descent toward the smoke. Two small figures against the vast, indifferent landscape, walking straight into the heart of the fire. The smoke from the Double C Ranch was a smudge on the horizon behind them, a constant reminder of the fire breathing down their necks. They had walked for 10 miles since dawn, skirting the edges of the open range, sticking to the broken ground where horses struggled to find footing. By midday, the heat was a physical weight, pressing down on Clara's shoulders. Her water skin was nearly empty, and the cornbread Maya had given them was gone. They needed supplies. They came upon a small trading post known as White Rock, a cluster of 3 buildings huddled around a dusty crossroads. It was not much a general store, a blacksmith, and a corral, but to Clara, it looked like salvation. "Stay back," Talisi warned, pulling his hat low. "I will go. You are the face on the wanted posters, and you are a Navajo in a town that hates them," Clara countered, wiping sweat from her brow. "We go together. I have money. Money usually buys silence." Talisi did not like it, but he nodded. He loosened the thong on his knife sheath. They walked in. The store smelled of pickle brine, sawdust, and stale tobacco. A bell jingled above the door. The proprietor, a balding man with an apron stained with coffee, looked up from the counter. He smiled instinctively, then stopped. His eyes flicked to Clara's torn blue dress, then to the silent, dark-skinned man standing a step behind her. The air in the room curdled. "We need flour, beans, and coffee," Clara said, keeping her voice steady. She reached into her pocket and placed a silver dollar on the counter. "And jerky, if you have it." The man did not touch the coin. He reached under the counter. When his hand came up, it was holding a double-barreled shotgun. He rested the barrels on the wood, pointing them vaguely at Talisi's chest. "Get out," the man said. Clara froze. "Sir, we have money. We are just travelers." "I know who you are," the man spat. "The telegraph came through this morning. Whitmore's girl, the thief, and the savage who kidnapped her." "I was not kidnapped," Clara said, her voice rising. "I am paying for goods. Your money is no good here," the shopkeeper growled. "Silas Crow sent word. Anyone helps you, they answer to him. And I'm not losing my business for a thief and a redskin. Now get out before I blow a hole in your buck." Talisi moved before Clara could scream. He stepped in front of her, shielding her body with his own. He did not draw his weapon. He simply stared at the man with eyes that were older and harder than the desert stone. "Keep your poison," Talisi said. He backed out, pushing Clara gently but firmly through the door. They retreated into the blinding sun, the bell jingling cheerfully behind them, a mocking sound. "You see?" Talisi said, as they hurried away from the crossroads, the sound of the door being bolted echoing behind them. "Crow does not need to be here to hurt us. His shadow is long." Clara felt a hot tear of frustration track through the dust on her cheek. "They are starving us out." "Then we eat what the land gives," Talisi said. "Come, I know a place." The place was a ghost of a homestead, a small cabin built of weathering gray timber, tucked into a fold of the landscape where the red rocks met the pine forests of the higher elevation. It sat on the edge of the reservation land, a forgotten outpost. The roof sagged, and the windows were empty, but it offered 4 walls and a roof. They approached cautiously. Talisi circled the perimeter, checking the dirt. "Someone has been here," he murmured, crouching by the rotting steps. "Small feet, barefoot." "A child?" Clara asked. Before Talisi could answer, a pebble sailed through the air and hit him square in the chest. It was followed by a high, thin voice. "That is close enough, tall man." A boy dropped down from the branches of an oak tree shading the roof. He landed in the dust with a thud and scrambled back, holding a sharpened stick like a spear. He could not have been more than 8 years old. He was a scrawny thing, with hair the color of straw and a face smeared with mud. But his blue eyes were sharp and intelligent. He looked like a fox that had learned to walk on two legs. Tudlisi did not flinch. He looked at the boy, then at the stick. "That is a good point on that wood." "Hickory." The boy blinked, surprised by the casual tone. "Oak, hardened in the fire." He narrowed his eyes on Clara. "You look like the picture." Clara stepped forward. "What picture?" "The paper the man showed me," the boy said. He did not lower the stick. Big man, loud voice, had a star on his chest, but he smelled like a dead skunk. "Deputy Voss," Clara whispered to Tulisi. "He was here," Tulisi asked the boy. "Yesterday," the boy said. "He asked if I saw a girl with a canvas bag and a big Indian. He gave me a nickel to keep my eyes open." The boy reached into his ragged pocket and pulled out the coin, flipping it in the air. "I took the nickel. Didn't tell him I live here, though. Told him I was just catching lizards." "What is your name?" Clara asked gently. "Eli," the boy said. "Just Eli." "Where are your parents?" "Eli." "Gone," Eli said, the word flat and final. "Fever took Ma 2 winters ago. Pa went to look for gold and never came back. I'm fine." Tulisi looked at the boy with a newfound respect. An orphan surviving alone in this country was no small thing. It took grit. "We need shelter for the night," Eli, Tulisi said. "We have no food to trade, but I can show you how to set a snare for a rabbit that actually works." Eli eyed Tulisi's knife, then looked at Clara's tired face. He lowered the stick. "The roof leaks in the corner," Eli said, "but the fireplace draws well." Inside the cabin, the air was cool and smelled of wood smoke and pine needles. Eli had made a nest of blankets in one corner. It was a meager existence, but it was a home. As evening approached, Tulisi took Eli outside to check the snares, leaving Clara alone with the fading light. She sat on the floor, the ledger heavy in her lap. The encounter at the trading post gnawed at her. They could not rely on anyone. The law was against them. The towns were against them. "If we are caught," she thought, "the truth dies with us." She opened the ledger. The pages were filled with her father's neat, cramped handwriting, rows of numbers, dates, and coded phrases. Shipment B, delivered to Red Rock. Payment received in gold. She needed a backup. She reached into her bag for a pencil and a scrap of paper. As she dug past the spare petticoat and the small tin of matches, her fingers brushed against something stiff in the lining of the bag. It felt like paper, but it was hidden beneath the canvas seam. Frowning, Clara worked her finger into a small tear in the fabric. She pulled out a folded envelope. It was old, the paper yellowed and brittle. She unfolded it. The handwriting was unmistakable. It was her father's. But this was not a ledger entry. It was a letter addressed to her. "My dearest Clara, if you are reading this, then my heart has finally failed me, or Silas Crow has grown impatient. Do not weep for me. Child, I have lived a long life. You must know why I kept the ledger. It was not just for justice. It was for you. Crow threatened to take the house, to take you, if I did not cooperate with his telegraph silence. He made me erase the messages from the army regarding the Navajo treaties. He made me send false reports of raids. He is building a kingdom on bones. Clara, he intends to provoke a war so the government will clear the territory, and he can buy the land for pennies. He stole your mother's locket from my desk to remind me of his reach. He is a devil. Take the book to Santa Fe. Trust only the marshal, and forgive your father for being a coward for so long. Love, Papa." Clara let the letter fall to her lap. A sob caught in her throat, sharp and jagged. It was not just greed. It was personal. Crow had tormented her father for years, using her as leverage. The heart attack was likely no accident. The door creaked open. Tulisi entered, carrying 2 skinned rabbits. Eli followed, looking proud. Tulisi saw her face immediately. He dropped the rabbits on the table and was at her side in 2 strides. "Clara." She handed him the letter. Her hand was shaking, not with fear, but with a cold, white-hot rage. Lizzie read it. He was not a man of many words, but his jaw tightened until the muscle jumped. He looked at her, and she saw a reflection of her own anger in his dark eyes. "He killed him," Clara whispered. "He slowly squeezed the life out of him? Then we squeezed back," Lizzie said. His voice was low, dangerous. "We do not run anymore. Clara, we march." He moved to the window, checking the darkening tree line. "But first, we must survive the night." Clara wiped her eyes. The tears were gone. She picked up her pencil. "I'm copying the code," she said, her voice steady. "I will sew the copy into my dress. If they take the bag, if they take the book, I will still be the evidence." Lizzie nodded. He turned to Eli. "Boy, you have good eyes. Watch the south ridge. If a bird flies up in the dark, you tell me." Eli nodded, gripping his sharpened stick. He was part of the pack now. The attack came 3 hours after sunset. There was no warning shout, no thunder of hooves, just the sudden shattering of the single glass window pane and the thud of something heavy hitting the floor. "Down!" Lizzie roared, tackling Clara just as the object, a burning rag soaked in kerosene, flared up, illuminating the room in harsh, dancing light. The door burst open. 3 men filled the frame. Deputy Voss was in the lead, his revolver drawn. Behind him were 2 hired guns, men with dead eyes and dusters. "End of the line. Miss Whitmore," Voss bellowed. Lizzie rolled, coming up in a crouch. He had his knife in one hand, his rifle in the other, but he did not fire, because Voss was not aiming at him. One of the hired men had grabbed Eli. The man had a thick forearm across the boy's throat, lifting his small feet off the ground. Eli kicked and clawed, but he was helpless against the man's bulk. A knife was pressed against the boy's ribs. "Drop the gun! Injun!" Voss shouted, his face twisted in a triumphant grin. "Or the brat gets gutted like a fish." Time seemed to suspend. The fire in the corner crackled, eating at the dry wood of the floorboards. Clara scrambled to her knees, clutching the ledger. She looked at Lizzie. She saw the calculation in his eyes. He could make the shot. He could put a bullet in the man holding Eli. But if he missed by an inch, or if the man's muscles spasmed. Lizzie looked at Eli. The boy's eyes were wide with terror, his face pale beneath the dirt. Lizzie lowered the rifle. "Let the boy go," Lizzie said. "He is nothing to you." "He is leveraged," Voss sneered. "Throw the rifle out the door. Kick the knife over here." Lizzie slowly placed the rifle on the floor and shoved it away. He tossed the knife to Voss's feet. "Smart," Voss said. He holstered his gun and pulled out a pair of iron cuffs. "Now, turn around." Lizzie stood tall. He did not turn. He looked past Voss, into the darkness outside. "You have made a mistake, Deputy. The only mistake is yours. Breathing my air," Voss said, stepping forward. As Voss reached for Lizzie, the Navajo moved. It was not an attack. It was a distraction. He grabbed the burning kerosene rag from the floor, ignoring the sear of the flame on his palm, and hurled it not at the men, but at the stack of old, dry blankets near the door. Whoosh! The fire roared up, creating a wall of heat and smoke between Voss and the man holding Eli. "Run! Eli!" Lizzie shouted. In the confusion, the man holding Eli flinched from the heat. Eli, true to his nature, bit the man's hand hard. The man yelled and dropped him. Eli scrambled on all fours toward the back wall, where a loose log provided a small exit. "Get the boy!" Voss screamed, coughing in the smoke. Lizzie did not go for a weapon. He went for Voss. He slammed into the deputy, driving him back into the wall. It was a collision of bone and muscle. Easy struck him once, a concise, brutal blow to the solar plexus that folded Voss in half, wheezing. He could have snapped Voss's neck. Clara saw the opportunity. It was right there. But Easy stopped. He grabbed Voss by the collar and threw him into the other gunman, tangling them together. "Clara, the window!" Clara grabbed her bag and dove through the broken window frame, tumbling into the cool dirt outside. Easy followed a second later, vaulting through the smoke. "My ledger!" Clara gasped, checking her bag. It was there. "Move!" Easy grabbed her hand. They ran into the tree line, the sound of coughing and cursing fading behind them. They found Eli waiting by a large boulder, shivering but unhurt. "You bit him," Tulisi said, breathless. "He tasted like dirt," Eli said, wiping his mouth. "You did good," Tulisi said. He looked back at the cabin. The fire was spreading now, consuming the old timber. It was a beacon that would draw every eye in the county. "We cannot stay here," Tulisi said. "We have to go to Red Mesa. Tonight, we cross the high pass." "But the contact," Clara stammered. "The lawyer is in Silverton." "Red Mesa leads to Silverton," Tulisi said. "It is the only way Voss will not follow. It is too steep for horses." They turned to leave, but a voice stopped them. It did not come from the cabin. It came from the darkness ahead of them, from the shadows of the pine trees. "Run, Rabbit, run!" Clara froze. The voice was smooth, rich like molasses, and terrifyingly familiar. A match flared in the dark, illuminating a face. Silas Crow sat on a black horse, dressed in a pristine gray suit that seemed untouched by the dust of the territory. He was smoking a cigar. He was alone, or seemed to be. He was 20 yards away, just out of easy pistol range in the dark, but his presence was suffocating. "Mr. Crow?" Clara whispered. Crow smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. "Miss Whitmore, you have caused me a great deal of trouble and expense." Easy stepped in front of Clara and Eli, his body a shield. He had no weapon. His rifle and knife were in the burning cabin, but he stood ready to fight with his hands. "Let them go," Easy said. Crow laughed softly. "Oh, I am letting you go, boy. For now." He took a puff of his cigar, the ember glowing red like a demon's eye. "You see, if I kill you now, you become martyrs, a poor white girl and a noble savage, murdered in the dark. No, that is too messy." Crow gestured to the burning cabin. "By tomorrow morning, the story will be that you, Tlizzy Yazzie, burned down a settler's home and killed the family inside. And you, my dear Clara, you will be the mad woman who helped him." Clara gripped the strap of her bag. "I have proof. Silas, I have a ledger, and I found the letter." Crow's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, then returned, colder than before. "Paper burns, Clara, and reputations burn faster." He turned his horse slowly. "Go to Red Mesa. Run until your lungs bleed. I will make this whole region hate you before I catch you. I will make you beg me to take that book back." He spurred his horse and vanished into the darkness, a phantom of the night. Clara stood trembling in the cold wind. The threat hung in the air, heavier than the smoke. "He is playing with us," she whispered. Tulisi looked at the spot where Crow had been. "He thinks he is the hunter," he said quietly. "He thinks we are prey." He turned to Clara and Eli. He reached out and wiped a smudge of soot from Clara's cheek. His touch was gentle, a stark contrast to the violence of the night. "He is wrong," Tulisi said. "We are not prey. We are the storm he did not see coming." He picked up Eli, settling the exhausted boy on his hip. "To Red Mesa," he commanded. "We climb." They moved into the deep woods, leaving the fire and the lies behind them. The path ahead was steep, dangerous, and dark. But Clara touched the sewn patch in her dress where the copied code lay against her heart. She had the truth. Tulisi had the strength. And Eli. Eli had the will to bite the hand that held him. They were a family now, forged in fire. And they were going to war. Red Mesa was not a mountain. It was a wound in the earth, a jagged cathedral of sandstone that rose against the star-strewn sky like the spine of a sleeping dragon. The wind here did not blow. It screamed. It tore through the narrow slot canyons, whipping sand into a frenzy that stung the eyes and scoured the skin. Tulisi Yazzie led the way, his movement slow and deliberate. He carried Eli on his back now. The boy had gone limp with exhaustion miles ago, his small arms wrapped tightly around Tulisi's neck. Clara Whitmore followed, her breath coming in ragged gasps that tore at her throat. The elevation was stealing the air from her lungs, but fear was driving her forward. They had climbed for 4 hours since escaping the burning cabin. They had reached the high pass, a narrow ledge that wound around the sheer face of the mesa. Below them, the darkness was absolute, a void that swallowed sound. Above, the moon was a cold, indifferent eye. "We are close," Tulisi shouted over the wind. He stopped, leaning against the rock face to adjust the weight of the boy. His chest heaved, sweat tracking through the soot on his face. The trail widens ahead, then it drops down into the Silverton Valley. Clara nodded, unable to speak. She adjusted the heavy canvas bag on her shoulder. It felt like it contained lead bars. Not paper. Inside, wrapped in the thick wool of her spare petticoat, was the ledger. But in the hidden lining of her shawl, pressed tight against her ribs, was the packet of papers, the copy she had frantically scribbled in the cabin. "You are bleeding," Clara said, reaching out to touch a dark spot on Tulisi's sleeve. He had cut his arm on a sharp rock during the ascent. "It is nothing," Tulisi said. He looked at her, his eyes intense. "Stay close to the wall. The wind can throw a horse off this ledge." They moved forward, rounding a sharp bend where the trail opened up into a natural amphitheater, a bowl of stone carved by centuries of wind. Tulisi stopped so abruptly that Clara bumped into him. "What is it?" she asked. Then she saw them. Lanterns flared to life, one by one, forming a semicircle around the exit of the pass. The yellow light danced on the red walls, casting long, monstrous shadows. There were 6 men. They stood with rifles leveled, their faces obscured by the brims of their hats and the bandanas covering their noses. In the center, sitting on a flat rock like a king on a throne, was Silas Crow. He was peeling an apple with a small, pearl-handled knife. Next to him stood Deputy Harlan Voss, looking battered from the fight in the cabin, his face bruised and his eyes burning with a murderous hate. "I told you, Miss Whitmore!" Crow called out, his voice smooth and carrying easily over the wind. "I told you I would make the region hate you, but it seems I arrived before the hate did." Tulisi slowly lowered Eli to the ground. He pushed the boy behind him, shielding him with his legs. Tulisi had no rifle. He had no knife. He stood with his empty hands hanging at his sides, but every muscle in his body was coiled like a spring. "Let them pass," Tulisi said. His voice was not loud, but it cut through the wind. "Your quarrel is with the book, not the boy." Voss laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "My quarrel is with you, savage. You broke my nose." He stepped forward, raising his heavy Colt revolver. "I say we kill the buck, take the girl, and throw the brat off the cliff." Now, Harlan," Crow chided gently, slicing a piece of apple. "We are civilized men." Crow stood up, wiping the knife on his trousers. He took a step toward them. The gunmen tightened their circle. "I am a businessman, Clara," Crow said. "I believe in fair exchange." He pointed the knife at her bag. "You give me the ledger, the real one, not some forgery, and in exchange, I let you walk away. I will even give you a horse." "And Tulisi?" Clara asked, her voice trembling but loud. Crow shrugged. "The Indian stays. He is a fugitive. He burned down a homestead. Justice must be served." "No," Clara said. "Then we have an impasse." Crow sighed. He signaled with his hand. It happened fast. 2 men lunged from the shadows on the right. Clara and Tulisi had been focused on the center. Tulisi spun, striking the first man in the throat with a rigid hand, sending him choking to the ground. But the second man swung a rifle butt, catching Tulisi in the ribs. Tulisi grunted, stumbling but not falling. He grabbed the rifle barrel, twisting it, using the man's momentum to throw him into the dirt. But while Tulisi fought, a third man, small and quick, darted past him. "Eli!" Clara screamed. The man grabbed the boy by his hair and the back of his shirt, dragging him across the gravel. Eli kicked and bit, but the man was ready for it. He slammed the boy against the rock wall and pressed a long, serrated Bowie knife to Eli's throat. "Move and I open him up!" the man shrieked. Tulisi froze. He was mid-stride, ready to crush the windpipe of the man he was wrestling. But he stopped. He saw the blade against the thin skin of the boy's neck. A single drop of blood welled up where the steel kissed the flesh. The rage in Tulisi was a physical thing. a fire that threatened to consume him. He wanted to tear them apart. He wanted to bathe the red rocks in their blood. But the oath he had taken, the oath to protect the innocent, to be the shield, held him back. If he moved, Eli died. Character versus self. The warrior wanted war. The protector needed peace. Crow walked forward, stepping over the man Talisi had downed. He smiled, a cold, triumphant expression. "You see," Crow said softly, "leverage. It always works." He turned his gaze to Clara. She stood alone in the center of the trail, the wind whipping her dress around her legs. She looked small, fragile, and utterly defeated. "The book, Clara," Crow said, extending his hand. "Or the boy bleeds out right here." Clara looked at Eli. The boy's eyes were wide, filled with tears, but he did not beg. He looked at Talisi. Clara looked at Talisi. He was breathing hard, his hands clenched into fists so tight his knuckles were white. He was looking at her, and in his eyes, she saw an apology. He could not save them both. Something inside Clara broke. It was the part of her that had been afraid. The part that had been the polite telegraph operator's daughter. It shattered, and underneath, the steel that her father had known was there finally hardened. She was not just a victim. She was not just a witness. She was the daughter of the West. Slowly, deliberately, she took the canvas bag off her shoulder. "You want it?" she asked. Her voice was flat, devoid of emotion. "I want it," Crow said, his greedy eyes fixing on the bag. Clara reached into the bag. She pulled out the oilskin-wrapped bundle. It was the size of the ledger. It felt like a ledger, but inside were old newspapers and a rock she had wrapped earlier, just in case. The real ledger was strapped to the small of her back, under her corset, burning against her skin. "Here," Clara said. She threw the bundle. She did not throw it to Crow. She threw it over the edge of the cliff. "No!" Crow screamed, lurching forward. The bundle tumbled into the darkness, vanishing into the void. For a second, there was absolute silence. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Crow turned to Clara. His face twisted into a mask of pure, animalistic fury. The civilized businessman was gone. The monster was loose. "You stupid little witch," he hissed. "It is gone," Clara said, her chin high. "Your proof is gone. Now let the boy go." Crow pulled a revolver from his coat. "Kill them," he roared. "Kill them all." The man holding Eli tightened his grip on the knife. Talisi moved. He did not lunge at Crow. He did not run for cover. He threw himself bodily across the gap between him and Eli. It was a desperate, suicidal dive. The man with the knife slashed. Talisi did not block it. He took it. He took the blade deep into his left shoulder, interposing his own body between the steel and the child. A spray of blood, dark and hot, painted the rock wall. Talisi roared, a sound of agony and fury, and slammed his right fist into the attacker's temple. The man crumpled instantly. "Run, Eli," Talisi gasped. Falling to his knees, his left arm hanging uselessly. Chaos erupted. Voss fired his Colt. The bullet struck the stone inches from Clara's head, sending stone splinters into her cheek. Clara did not run. She dropped to the ground, scrambling toward the man Talisi had knocked out earlier, the one with the rifle. She grabbed the Winchester from the dirt. It was heavy, heavier than she expected. She rolled onto her back, levering around into the chamber just as her father had taught her years ago in their backyard. Pull, crank, aim. Voss was aiming at Talisi, who was trying to shield Eli with his body, blood pouring from his shoulder. Clara did not think. She did not hesitate. She aimed at Voss. Bang! The rifle kicked hard against her shoulder, bruising the bone. The bullet did not hit Voss in the heart. It struck his right hand, the hand holding the revolver. Voss screamed, dropping his gun. His hand was a ruin of blood and bone. My hand! My hand!" he shrieked, falling to his knees. Crow spun around, searching for the shooter. He saw Clara, lying in the dirt, working the lever of the rifle again. Her face was grim, her eyes a cold gray flint. "You!" Crow snarled, raising his own gun. But before he could fire, a voice boomed from the darkness above them. "Drop it, Silas." Crow looked up. On the high ridge overlooking the pass, silhouettes appeared against the moon. Rifles glinted. It was Maya, and with her were 5 men Navajo sheep herders and a few rough-looking prospectors from the mining camp who had been watered by Maya for years. They were the community Tlazi had protected. They were the people Crow had forgotten. "We have the high ground," Maya shouted, holding an old buffalo gun. "And we do not miss it." Crow looked at the ridges. He looked at Voss, bleeding and useless. He looked at Tlazi, wounded but still covering the boy. And he looked at Clara, the barrel of her Winchester steady on his chest. The odds had shifted. Crow was a gambler, but he was not a fool. He knew when a hand was lost. "This isn't over," he spat at Clara. "You have no proof. That book is at the bottom of the canyon." Clara did not speak. She just tightened her finger on the trigger. Crow cursed. He holstered his gun, grabbed the reins of his horse which was tied nearby, and swung into the saddle. "Let's go," he shouted to his remaining men. They scrambled for their horses, abandoning the unconscious men and the wailing Voss. They rode hard, disappearing back down the trail into the dark throat of the canyon. As they fled, Crow's saddlebag, hastily buckled, flapped open. A sheaf of papers, land deeds, stamped with the territorial seal, fluttered out, caught by the wind, and scattered across the trail like white leaves. Silence returned to Red Mesa, broken only by the wind and Voss's whimpering. Clara dropped the rifle. Her arms were shaking so hard she could barely feel them. She scrambled up and ran. Not away. She ran toward Tlazi. "Tlazi!" He was slumped against the rock wall, his face a grayish hue under the moonlight. The blood from his shoulder had soaked his shirt and pooled in the dust. Eli was crying, pressing his small hands against the wound, trying to stop the flow. "I am here," Tlazi whispered, his voice thready. Clara fell to her knees beside him. She ripped the hem of her petticoat, her hands moving with frantic purpose. "You stupid, brave man!" she sobbed, pressing the cloth against the wound. "Why did you do that?" Tlazi's eyes fluttered open. He looked at Eli, who was safe. Then he looked at Clara. He saw the soot on her face, the bruise on her cheek, the fierce determination in her eyes. "Because," he breathed, a faint smile touching his lips. "You hold the line. Stay with me," Clara commanded, her voice cracking. "Do not you dare leave me now. We are winning. Do you hear me? We are winning." Tlazi reached up with his good hand. His fingers, cold and rough, brushed her cheek. "Angel," he whispered. Then his hand fell, and his eyes rolled back. "No!" Clara screamed. She pressed harder on the wound, her own blood mixing with his. Maya and the men were scrambling down the rocks now, their voices urgent. But Clara did not see them. She only saw the man who had walked through fire for her. She leaned down, pressing her forehead against his. She felt the faint, thready beat of his pulse in his neck. It was weak, but it was there. "I am yours," she whispered fiercely into the darkness, answering the question he had not yet asked. "I am yours, so you must stay." The wind howled around them, carrying the scent of rain and sage. The battle was over. The enemy had fled. But as Clara knelt in the red dust, holding the warrior's broken body, she knew the war had taken something from her. The girl who had stepped off the train in a white shawl was gone. In her place was a woman with blood on her hands and a fire in her heart. She looked at the scattered papers Crow had dropped the evidence he left behind in his panic, and she felt the hard weight of the real ledger pressed against her spine. "We have him," she whispered to the unconscious Tlazi. "We have him." And then the tears finally came, hot and cleansing, washing the dust from her face as the first drops of rain began to fall on the thirsty desert. The rain had passed, leaving the high desert washed clean and smelling of wet sage and ozone. They had carried Tlazi down from the mesa, a slow and agonizing descent in the dark, guided by Maya and the men who had come to their aid. They had brought him to a hidden shelter, a cave tucked deep within a box canyon where the walls were streaked with mineral tears and the ground was soft with sand. It had been 2 days since the fight at Red Mesa. 2 days of fever and silence. Clara Whitmore sat by the small fire, her hands resting in her lap. They were not the hands of the girl who had boarded the train a week ago. The nails were broken. The skin was stained with walnut juice and earth, and there were calluses forming on her palms. She watched the chest of the man sleeping on the pile of furs. It rose and fell, a steady, reassuring rhythm that was the only clock she needed. She stood up and moved to him, kneeling beside the pallet. She dipped a cloth into a bowl of cool water mixed with willow bark and gently wiped the sweat from his forehead. Tall Easy looked different in sleep. The warrior's mask was gone. The hard lines of vigilance around his eyes had smoothed out. He looked younger, yet somehow more ancient. His left shoulder was heavily bandaged with clean linen provided by Maya, the white cloth stark against his copper skin. Clara traced the line of his jaw with her eyes, not daring to touch him yet. She had spent 19 years being told that men were to be feared or obeyed. Her father had been kind, but distant. Silas Crow had been a predator wrapped in silk. But this man who had barely spoken 10 words at a time, who had walked through fire and taken a knife for a child not of his blood. He was something else. He was the earth itself, dangerous. Yes, but solid and safe. She adjusted the blanket, her fingers brushing against the turquoise beads he still wore. "You are awake," she whispered, sensing the change in his breathing before he even opened his eyes. Tall Easy's lashes fluttered. He opened his eyes slowly. They were dark, swimming with pain and the mist of herbs, but they found her instantly. There was no confusion, no moment of wondering where he was. He knew. "Clara," he rasped. His voice was like grinding stones. "Here," she said, quickly lifting a cup of water to his lips. "Drink. Maya says you lost too much blood. You need to put the river back inside you." He drank, his eyes never leaving her face. When he finished, he let his head fall back against the saddlebag that served as a pillow. "The boy?" he asked. "Eli is outside," Clara said, a soft smile touching her lips. "He is helping Maya collect firewood. He hasn't left your side until an hour ago. He thinks you are a god, I believe." Tall Easy let out a breath that might have been a laugh. "Just a man. A slow one. To get cut like that." "A brave one," Clara corrected him, her voice fierce. "A stupid, brave man." He looked at her then, really looked at her. He saw the fatigue etched under her eyes, the way she held her shoulders stiffly, as if ready to defend him again. "You are still here," he said softly. It wasn't a question, but it held a note of wonder. "Where else would I be?" Clara asked. "You could have run." Tall Easy said, "When Crow fled, you could have taken the papers and gone to the town. Left the Indian to die in the dirt. It would have been easier." Clara stiffened. She reached out and took his hand. His skin was warm, calloused, and large enough to swallow hers. "I do not want easy," she said. "I want it to be true. And you are the truest thing I have found in this whole wretched territory." She squeezed his hand. "Besides, I told you, I am yours." The air in the cave shifted. The fire popped, sending a spark spiraling up toward the soot-blackened ceiling. The silence that stretched between them was not the silence of the hunt or the desert. It was heavy, charged with something that made Clara's heart hammer against her ribs. Tleasy turned his hand over, lacing his fingers with hers. His grip was weak, but possessing. "Come here," he whispered. Clara hesitated only for a heartbeat. She was afraid, not of him, but of the vastness of what she was feeling. It was terrifying to let someone see you this clearly, to be this vulnerable. She moved closer, shifting until she was sitting by his hip. She looked down at him. "Does it hurt?" she asked, gesturing to his shoulder. "Only when I breathe," he said. "But looking at you, it helps." Clara blushed, the heat rising to her cheeks. She felt foolish, like a schoolgirl, but also powerful. She leaned forward, resting her hand tentatively on his chest, over his heart. She could feel the steady thump, thump, thump beneath her palm. "Talizi," she started, her voice trembling. "Say it," he murmured. His eyes were half closed, but burning with intensity. "Say what is in your eyes. Clara." She took a ragged breath. The firelight danced in her eyes, making them shine like polished silver. "Tell me I'm yours," she gasped, the words tumbling out in a rush. It was a plea, a demand, a surrender. It was her way of asking for permission to stop running, to stop fighting alone. She wanted to belong to someone who would not break her. Talizi shifted, ignoring the pain that flared in his shoulder. He reached up with his good hand and cupped the back of her neck, his fingers tangling in her hair. He pulled her down slowly, until their faces were inches apart. "Forever, Angel," he whispered. The endearment was rough, foreign on his tongue, but he meant it. To him, she was light in the darkness. She was the impossible thing that had happened to him. He closed the distance. His lips were dry and hot. The kiss was tentative at first, a question asked and answered. But as Clara made a small sound in her throat and leaned into him, the kiss deepened. It became an anchor. It was the taste of survival, of defied odds, of two broken pieces fitting together to make something whole. Clara lost herself in his warmth. The smell of sage and iron and man filled her senses. She carefully avoided his injured shoulder, her hands exploring the planes of his chest, the hard muscle of his arm. He held her as if she were made of glass, precious and fragile. Yet he kissed her with a hunger that told her he needed her just as much. The shadows of the cave seemed to close in around them, wrapping them in a private world where Silas Crow and his gunmen did not exist. There was only the fire, the wind outside, and the beat of two hearts finding the same rhythm. The next morning, the sun rose clear and bright, bathing the canyon in gold. Clara stepped out of the cave, blinking against the light. She stretched, her body aching from sleeping on the ground, but her spirit felt light. She walked down to the small stream that trickled through the canyon floor and splashed water on her face. When she looked up, she saw her reflection in a still pool. The girl looking back was different. Her hair was braided back simply. Her dress was mended but stained. But her eyes were steady. The fear that had been her constant companion was gone, replaced by a calm resolve. She heard footsteps crunching on the gravel. She turned to see Eli running toward her, holding a handful of blue wildflowers. "For the invalid," Eli chirped, grinning. Clara laughed. "He will love them. Eli, but don't call him an invalid. He might try to wrestle you." Eli giggled. "He is awake. Maya is making him soup. He tried to stand up, but Maya hit him with a spoon." Clara smiled, her heart swelling. "Good. He needs to rest." She looked at the boy. In just a few days, he had gone from a feral, lonely creature to a child who laughed and picked flowers. "Eli," Clara said, crouching down to his level, "when this is over, when we take the book to the town, what do you want to do?" Eli kicked at the dirt. "Don't know. Stay with you." And the tall man, Clara reached out and smoothed his messy hair. "Yes, I think that is a very good plan." She stood up and looked back at the cave entrance. Talizi was sitting up now, leaning against the rock wall outside, wrapped in a blanket. He was watching them. Even from this distance, she could feel his gaze. It was a tether. She walked back to him, Eli skipping ahead. "You should be lying down," she scolded gently as she approached. "The ground is hard," Talizi grumbled, though his eyes were warm. "And I wanted to see the sun." "We have to move today," Clara said, her tone shifting to business. "Not far, just to the edge of the valley. But we cannot stay here. Crow will regroup. He will send more men." Talizi nodded. "He will try to block the road to Silverton. He knows that is where the marshal is." "Let him try," Clara said. She patted the canvas bag that was never far from her reach. "We have the ledger, and we have the papers he dropped. We have enough to hang him twice." Talizi studied her. "You are not afraid anymore." "I am terrified," Clara admitted. "But I am not paralyzed. There is a difference." She helped him stand. He leaned heavily on her for a moment, his face paling, but he found his footing. "We walk," he said. The journey to the edge of Silverton took 2 days. They moved slowly, sticking to the tree line, avoiding the main roads. Maya and her people acted as scouts, moving ahead and behind, a silent network of protection. Rumors reached them from travelers they passed, careful whispers exchanged for water. Silas Crow was offering $1,000 for the capture of the madwoman and the savage. He had hired men from as far away as Tucson. He had blocked the main bridge, but Clara and Tillizzy did not take the bridge. They took the old goat paths that Tillizzy knew from his childhood, paths that did not exist on any map. By late afternoon of the second day, they stood on a ridge overlooking the town of Silverton. It was a bustling mining town, with brick buildings and church spires rising from the valley floor. It looked like civilization. It looked like the end of the road. "The marshal's office is near the courthouse," Clara said, pointing to a large white building with a flag flying out front. "Reverend Thomas, the man my father trusted, lives next to the church." Tillizzy checked his bandage. The bleeding had stopped, and the strength was slowly returning to his arm, though it still throbbed with every heartbeat. "Crow will be watching the town," Tillizzy said. "He knows we have to go there. He expects us to sneak in at night," Clara said. She looked at Tillizzy, a daring idea forming in her mind. "He expects us to be hiding in the shadows. What are you thinking?" "Clara, I am thinking we will walk in through the front door," she said, "in broad daylight, with witnesses." Tillizzy raised an eyebrow. "That is dangerous." "It is the only way," Clara said. "If we sneak, they can shoot us in an alley and claim we resisted arrest. If we walk down Main Street, if everyone sees us, they cannot kill us without the whole town watching." She looked at Eli. "You stay here with Maya. Eli, it is too dangerous." "No," Eli protested. "I go. I can carry the bag if you get tired." Clara shook her head. "No, Eli, you are the backup. If something happens to us, you run to the Reverend. You tell him everything." Eli looked like he wanted to argue, but Tillizzy put a hand on his shoulder. "A warrior knows when to guard the camp," Tillizzy said. Eli swallowed hard and nodded. Clara took a deep breath. She reached into her bag and pulled out the ledger. She wrapped it in her shawl, the white shawl with the leather tie. She held it to her chest. "Ready?" she asked Tillizzy. He adjusted his hat. He looked at the town, then at her. "Ready," he said. They walked down the slope, leaving the safety of the wilderness behind. They walked onto the dusty road that led into Silverton. People stopped to stare. A hush fell over the street. They were a striking pair, the white woman in a torn blue dress with dirt on her face, walking tall and proud, and the Navajo warrior beside her, bandaged and limping, but moving with a lethal grace. A murmur ran through the crowd. "That's her. That's the Whitmore girl." From the porch of the saloon, a man stood up. He was one of Crow's hired guns. He put a hand to his holster. Tillizzy saw him. He did not flinch. He just kept walking, his eyes locked forward. Clara gripped the ledger so tight her knuckles were white. She did not look at the gunman. She looked at the courthouse. Just another 100 yards, she told herself. A wagon blocked their path. The driver, a rough-looking man, glared down at them. "Where do you think you're going?" "To see the law," Clara said, her voice loud and clear. "Move aside." The man hesitated. He looked at the crowd gathering on the sidewalks. He looked at Tillizzy's eyes. He flicked the reins and moved the wagon. They kept walking. Suddenly, a group of men stepped out from the sheriff's office. But it wasn't the marshal. It was Silas Crow, flanked by 3 deputies who looked nervous. Crow was smiling, but it was a tight, desperate smile. "Clara," he called out, spreading his arms. "Thank God, we have been so worried. You poor girl, wandering in the desert with this criminal." He stepped forward. "Come here, child. You are safe now. Give me the bag. We will get you to a doctor." The crowd watched. They saw a concerned pillar of the community reaching out to a traumatized girl. Clara stopped. She was 10 feet away from him. "I do not need a doctor. Silas," she said. Her voice rang out, silencing the whispers. "I need a judge." She held up the ledger. "This is the property of Arthur Whitmore," she announced to the crowd. "It contains the proof of illegal arms trading, land theft, and the murder of 3 federal agents." Crow's smile vanished. "She is delirious," he shouted. "Seize her." "That man has drugged her." The deputies moved forward. Lizzie stepped in front of Clara. He was unarmed, wounded, and exhausted, but he stood like a wall. "No one touches her," he growled. "Shoot him," Crow screamed, losing all composure. "He is threatening an officer." A deputy drew his gun. Click. The sound of a hammer cocking came from behind Crow. A tall man in a black suit with a silver star on his chest stepped out of the courthouse. He held a shotgun. "I believe the lady asked to see a judge. Mr. Crow," Marshal Donovan said. His voice was dry and authoritative. "And I believe she has the right to speak." Crow spun around. "Marshal, this is a local matter. Federal agents were mentioned?" The marshal said. "That makes it my matter." He looked at Clara. "Bring the book inside, Miss Whitmore." Clara let out a breath she felt she had been holding for a lifetime. She looked at Talese. He nodded, a small, barely perceptible motion. She walked past Crow. She did not look at him. She walked up the steps of the courthouse, the ledger pressed to her heart. Lizzie followed her, limping but unbowed. They crossed the threshold of the law, leaving the heat and the dust outside. The truth had arrived. The heavy oak doors of the courthouse closed behind them, shutting out the dust and the noise of the street. But the silence inside was louder than any shout. The room smelled of beeswax, old paper, and the sweat of nervous men. Marshal Donovan stood behind a large mahogany desk. The ledger spread open before him. The only sound in the room was the rhythmic ticking of a grandfather clock and the rustle of pages being turned. Clara Whitmore stood in the center of the room. Her back was straight, her chin held high, though her legs trembled with a fatigue that went down to the bone. Easy Yazi stood beside her. He had refused a chair. He leaned slightly against the wall, favoring his injured shoulder. But his eyes were alert, scanning the deputies who lined the room. Deputy Harlan Voss stood near the window. His bandaged hand cradled against his chest. His face was a mask of pale fury, but there was sweat beading on his upper lip. He looked like a trapped coyote waiting for the trap to snap. "Well," Marshal Donovan said finally. He closed the book with a heavy thud that made Voss flinch. The marshal looked up. His eyes were hard, the kind of eyes that had seen too much of the frontier and liked very little of it. He looked at Clara, then at Voss. "It is a fascinating read, Miss Whitmore," Donovan said. His voice was calm, dangerous. "Your father was a meticulous man. He documented every transaction, every date, every time, and every name." "It is a forgery," Voss spat, pushing himself off the wall. "The girl is a liar. She wrote it herself to save her skin." Donovan picked up a loose piece of paper that had been tucked into the ledger, a telegraph transcript. "This telegraph is dated 4 months ago. It authorizes the payment of $500 to a deputy HVD for looking the other way when the shipment of repeating rifles arrived at the rail yard. It is signed by Silas Crow." Donovan looked at Voss. "Did she forge the bank seal on the transfer receipt too?" "Harlan." Voss opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The color drained from his face, leaving it the shade of old ash. "And here," Donovan continued, tapping a page, "a plan to sabotage the water pumps at the Navajo settlement near Broken Creek, to force them to move, to steal the land." The marshal stood up. "Deputies, take Mr. Voss into custody and send a wire to Tucson. I want a federal warrant issued for Silas Crow, dead or alive." "You cannot do this," Voss screamed as 2 deputies, men he had drunk with the night before, grabbed his arms. "I am the law in this town." "Not anymore," Donovan said coldly. "Now get him out of my sight." As they dragged Voss away, kicking and cursing, Clara felt a strange sensation wash over her. It was not a triumph. It was not joy. It was simply the release of a weight she had carried for so long she had forgotten what it felt like to stand straight without it. She looked at Tulisi. He was watching her. He did not smile, but the tension in his jaw had relaxed. He nodded once, a slow, solemn acknowledgement. It was done. The news spread through the territory faster than a prairie fire. Silas Crow, the man who owned half the county, was a fugitive. He had fled fast, disappearing into the vastness of Mexico before the warrant could reach him. But his empire crumbled behind him. Without his money to grease the wheels, his hired guns drifted away. The land deeds he had forged were frozen by the courts. The whiskey shipments stopped. It was not a perfect justice. The man himself was still free, breathing air somewhere south of the border. But his power was broken. The shadow he had cast over the land had lifted, for Clara and Tulisi. The days that followed were a time of quiet healing. The town of Silverton, which had been ready to hang them as outlaws, now looked at them with a mixture of shame and curiosity. The same shopkeepers who would have turned them away now tipped their hats when Clara walked down the street. It was not love prejudice ran deep in the soil, like the roots of the mesquite, but it was respect. They had seen the girl walk through the front door of the courthouse. They had seen the warrior stand beside her. Courage, it turned out, was a language everyone understood. Clara did not care for their apologies. She had found something more important. They established a temporary camp near the edge of the town, close enough to the telegraph office where Clara had been offered a job, but far enough out to see the stars. One evening, 3 weeks after the trial, Maya came to visit. She brought a basket of corn cakes and a small pouch of dried herbs for Tulisi's shoulder. They sat around a small fire. Eli was playing near the creek, trying to catch frogs, his laughter bright in the cooling air. "The wound heals well," Maya said, inspecting Tulisi's shoulder. "But the scar will stay. It is good. A man without scars has no stories." "I have enough stories," Tulisi said quietly. He looked at Clara across the fire. "I do not need more," Maya chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. She looked at the two of them, the white woman with ink stains on her fingers and the Navajo man with the stillness of the desert in his bones. "You think the hard part is over," Maya said. "You think because the bad man is gone, the world is soft. We know the world is not soft." "Grandmother," Clara said. "Good." Maya nodded. She picked up a handful of sand and let it slip through her fingers. "The desert does not change because you are happy. The sun still burns. The wind still cuts. Love does not make the desert disappear. Child, it teaches humans to live through it." She looked pointedly at Clara. "He is of the earth. You are of the wire and the word. It will not be easy. We will build a bridge," Clara said firmly. Maya smiled then, a true smile that crinkled her eyes. "Then build it strong." They decided to stay, not in the town, and not deep in the reservation, but on a piece of land that straddled the boundary. It was a high meadow near the timberline, where the red rocks gave way to pine forests. It was Tulisi's ancestral grazing land, but it had a clear line of sight to the telegraph poles that marched toward the horizon. They built the cabin themselves. It was slow work. Tulisi cut the logs, his strength returning day by day. Clara stripped the bark and mixed the mud for chinking. Eli fetched water and stones, feeling important and needed. It was a simple structure, one room, a sturdy fireplace, and a wide porch that faced the east. But to Clara, it was a palace. It was the first house she had ever chosen, not just inherited. Clara worked at the telegraph office in town during the days. She was the best operator they had ever seen. Her fingers flew across the key, sending messages of commerce, of birth, of death, across the miles. She was independent. She earned her own wage. She was no longer defined by her father or by the men who wanted to own her, but every evening, she rode the 5 miles back to the cabin, back to the smoke rising from the chimney, back to the 2 men who waited for her. Eli had thrived. He had lost the pinched, hungry look of a street urchin. He was growing tall, his skin turning golden brown from the sun. He learned to track from Talisi and to read from Clara. He was the bridge Maria had spoken of, part wild, part civilized, and wholly loved. One afternoon, late in the autumn, Clara sat on the porch mending a shirt. The air was crisp, smelling of pine resin and coming snow. Talisi came up the steps. He had been checking the horses. He stopped and watched her for a moment. He still had that habit, the stillness, the watching. He reached into his pocket and pulled out something. "Clara," he said. She looked up, sticking the needle into the fabric. "Yes." He held out his hand. In his palm lay a silver bracelet, set with a single, large turquoise stone. It was not a delicate, polished thing from a city jeweler. It was heavy, the silver hammered by hand, the stone rough and blue as the summer sky. "I traded 2 horses for the silver," he said. "My uncle made it." Clara took it. It was cool and heavy in her hand. "It is beautiful," she whispered. "It is protection." Talisi said, "In my culture, turquoise is the stone of the sky and the water. It brings health. It brings luck." He hesitated, then reached out and touched the white shawl that was draped over the back of her chair, the shawl he had tied with leather so many weeks ago. "You wear the white of your people," he said. "It is soft. It is light." He took the bracelet and placed it on her wrist, snapping the clasp shut. "Now you carry the sky," he said. "You carry the strength." Clara looked at the blue stone against her pale skin. It was a stark contrast, but it looked right. It looked complete. She stood up and picked up the shawl. She walked over to him and draped it around his neck, letting the ends hang down over his chest, mingling with his own beads. "And you," she said softly, adjusting the lace collar. "You wear the softness, because you are the one who taught me that gentle things can be strong." Talisi touched the lace. He looked at her, his dark eyes filled with an emotion that was too deep for words. "I was not the one who saved you, Clara," he said, his voice low. "I was a man looking for a fight to die in. I was empty, and I was a girl waiting for permission to live." Clara replied, "We saved each other." He pulled her close. The embrace was familiar now, but the thrill of it never faded. He smelled of the wind and the horses. She smelled of ink and lavender. "Crow is gone," Talisi murmured into her hair. "But the winter comes. The snow will be deep." "Let it come," Clara said, resting her head against his chest. "We have wood. We have food. We have a roof." "We have us," he corrected. They stood there for a long time, watching the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in violent streaks of purple and orange. Eli came running up the path, shouting about a deer he had seen. And the moment broke, dissolving into the chaotic, happy noise of a family. They did not marry in the church. The Reverend Thomas had offered, but Clara had politely declined. She did not need a piece of paper signed by the territory to tell her who she belonged to, and Talisi did not need a ceremony to tell him who his heart was. Instead, they went out on the first day of spring, after the snow had melted and the desert was blooming. The valley was a carpet of wildflowers, yellow brittlebush, purple verbena, and the fiery orange of the globe mallow. They walked out to a high point overlooking their land. Eli stood a little ways off, holding the reins of their horses. Clara wore her blue dress, the one she had mended a dozen times. Talisi wore his best shirt and turquoise beads. They stood facing each other. The wind played with Clara's hair. "I promise," Clara said, her voice clear and carrying on the breeze. "I promise to stand. I promise not to run. I promise that my voice will be your shield, and my heart will be your rest." Talisi took her hands. His grip was firm. "I promise," he said, the English words deliberate and heavy. "I promise to walk where you walk. I promise that my strength is your strength. I promise that as long as the sun rises, you will never be alone in the dark." He leaned down and kissed her. It was not a kiss of desperation, like in the cave. It was a kiss of confirmation, a seal on a contract written not in ink, but in blood and survival. "Tell me I'm yours," Clara whispered against his lips, the old refrain surfacing like a prayer. Talisi smiled, a rare, full smile that transformed his face. "Forever, Angel," he whispered back. They turned and looked out at the horizon. The world was vast. It was full of dangers, snakes, drought, men like Crow who would always try to take what wasn't theirs. But as they stood there, shoulder to shoulder, looking at the field of flowers that had drunk the rain and burst into life, they knew the truth. Courage was not a lightning strike. It was a choice you made every morning when your feet hit the floor. Justice was not a gavel. It was the refusal to look away. And love. Love was not a fairy tale. It was the shelter you built with your own hands, log by log, to keep the storm at bay. Clara Whitmore and Tlizzy Yazzie walked back down the hill toward their home, the white shawl fluttering in the wind, the turquoise gleaming on her wrist, ready to live the life they had fought for. Thank you so much for listening to the story of Clara and Tlizzy. I hope their journey touched your heart as much as it did mine. Please leave a comment below telling me where you are listening from. I would love to know how far these whispers of the Wild West have traveled. Are you listening from a bustling city or a quiet corner of the countryside? Let's share our thoughts and connect. If you enjoyed this tale, please consider subscribing to my channel, Wild West Tales. Like the video and hit that hype button to help this story reach more people. Your support means the world to me and helps keep the spirit of the frontier alive. Thank you, and happy trails.